It's been a while. I wanted to fix my sound, but I couldn't find many solutions. At least it will be much louder, but the quality still has some room for improvement. That's okay for now. So Game 5, Znosko-Borovsky versus Alekhine. Alekhine is black, Masters quadrangular, St. Petersburg, 1913. It opens with a Ruy Lopez, a6, bishop a4, d6, kind of a sideline, d4. Now bishop g4 was played in the game and was Marshall's preferred move, but Alekhine says that in retrospect this is not best. It's better to play bishop d7 because bishop g4, white can play d5, and after b5, which is the only move, d takes c6 and b takes a4, c4. Critical move. White maintains a better position, and black has limited counterplay. In the game, Znosko-Borovsky played bishop takes c6. Alekhine says it also obtains a good game, but it's not as good because it allows black to get counterplay. We see b takes c6 and pawn takes e5, pawn takes e5, and now queen e2. If the queens trade off, then obviously e5 pawn is not tanging because of rook d1 checkmate. So black would have no problems after the queen trade. White tries to prove something. Queen e2 was in the game. And now we see bishop d6, very natural. Bishop e3, knight to e7, h3, bishop h5, knight bd2, castle. According to Alekhine, f6 is equally just as good, vacating the f7 square for the bishop in case it's needed. But Alekhine sort of figured that white doesn't really have time to force black to a spot where he wished he had the f7 square. He just castles, recognizing his counterplay on the queen side, namely the open b file, which his queen can maneuver through. And that's what happens in the game as a matter of fact. g4, bishop g6, h4. If knight to h4, then knight d5. Maybe I should have presented this as like a problem solving exercise. Black to move, yeah, knight d5. Hitting the h4 knight, and so basically after knight takes g6, black has a good game after knight takes e3, queen takes e3, and now which way should you capture? F takes g6 is best. Black's pawn structure may look ruined, but he has extremely good mobility. All his pieces have a lot of squares to work with, like f4, d4. Black should be probably better, for sure. Because despite the pawn structure, black has very dynamic justification in the form of activity. So white plays h4 and f6 pretty much forced, h5, bishop f7, knight h4. Here's a key moment. Queen of b8, exclam. The black queen is going to enter through the b file, and Alekhine says it will be very effective. b3, queen b4, another exclam, threatening some future ideas with queen c3, f3 in the game. White could also try to open the G file here, but according to Alekhine, he prepared knight takes f5, G takes f5, and now queen to c3. And white cannot avoid losing his c pawn without any compensation, since so the rooks attack, the pawns attack. The only way to defend it, besides rook c1, which runs into bishop a3, would be to castle, but this gets mated in two by bishop a3, so that doesn't work either. This is good for black. So f3, and another critical moment. Rook f d8, exclam. According to Alekhine, I keep saying according, queen c3 was not as strong because he can sacrifice this pawn. If you want, you can try to test your creativity a little. Well, it's a pretty standard method. White can play king f2, sacrificing the c pawn for positional compensation. Just rook hc1, forcing queen to b2. And now knight c4 would be pretty interesting and safe for white. So after the queen's trade-off, white should be better because pawn structure and a little bit more breathing room and a pretty well placed king too. So rook f d8, exclam, king f2. White could also try to castle, but bishop c5 would be pretty strong. King f2, bishop c5, knight f1. Okay, rook d6, trade the bishops, knight to e3, rook a d8, rook hd1, and critical move, queen to c3, exclam. This undoubles the c-pawns by force, as highlighted by the squares, because since rook d2 is a major threat, white basically has to trade off the rooks and fix black structure in a very nice way, I should say. So rook takes d6 was played in the game because a move like knight f1, which would control d2, would not really change much. Black can just play a5, and sooner or later, white is going to have to trade the rooks. He takes, kind of making it easy for black. Rook d1, and now, of course, the very natural and energetic move, d5. The most energetic, in exchange for the a-pawn which black sacrifices, he obtains a dangerous passed pawn in the center. And Alekhine also says that it's important to note that this a2 pawn is a ready object of attack. Queen takes a6, d4, knight ef5. This knight on f5 can no longer be assisted by white's other pieces. Its inroad Alekhine quotes, on f5 loses much of its efficiency. Because I guess that it's like an empty gun, it's not really serving many functions. He trades, and we get this like empty gun with this queen standing on a6. The knight is not white's position's a little bit scattered. Lack of coordination. We see queen takes c2, queen retreats to block, queen c5. Now queen to d3. More tenacious would be queen to d2, slightly better, preparing rook c1 as well, because rook c1 is a threat because of rook takes c6, queen takes c6, and knight d7. Let's just say, for example, stupid move like h6. There would be rook c1, and then this combination. And obviously, white should win. So that's why queen to d2 is venomous. It's also venomous in the fact that it supports a possible g5 push. The best response would be queen f8, and black maintains a secure positional advantage. Queen d3 in the game, bishop e6. In order to be able to dislodge the knight at need by g6 is the point of this move. But white decided to withdraw the knight because he wants to bring his knight to d2 or maybe to e2, both just to kind of cover his king and to support his queen side. He's a little bit scared and moves on to defensive duty. So rook a8 attacking a2, rook d2, and queen to b4 exclam, preparing c5, c4, rook c2, c5, knight to f1, and black sacrifices the pawn temporarily. This allows black to break through into the camp and cooperate in a direct attack against white's king. An attack which will be irresistible because black will have a passed c-pawn, which fixes the white pieces far away on the other wing. Let's see. B takes c4, rook a3. You can see black is full of energy. Queen to d2, sorry, not queen e2, queen d2, because queen e2 runs into the d3 fork. Queen d2, queen c5, and king g3. If king g2, then it's basically even worse because bishop takes c4 threatens to capture f1 with check. King g3, bishop takes c4, queen c1, and rook c3 exclam. Rook takes, pawn takes, knight to e3, knight e3 played in the game. Because if queen takes c3, it's not working in view of queen to g1. So let me promote that variation, because that's the main line. Knight e3, bishop takes a2, queen c2, bishop e6, knight to d1, and game is almost finished. Queen to g1, Well, point of knight d1 is because he wants to eliminate the passed pawn. Otherwise, white would just lose too quickly. King h4. And okay, this is maybe the most. The next few moves are the most critical moments in the game. So the first move is g5 exclam. Okay, this move is not the most important. The next one will be. H takes g6. Now, can you find the move Alekhine played as black? It's pretty cute. Well, it's interesting. h5. It's a very nice move. It's like you're sacrificing these two pawns. Black is like, it looks crazy at first, maybe. But the pawn in reality on h5 shares in the attack because white is helpless against the specific threat queen h1 followed by h4. So obviously white cannot take this pawn so easily because I think it's just this is checkmate. Yeah. Knight e3 was played in the game. And now queen takes e3. Queen to a4. And the last few moves are not too interesting. And now, yeah, this is resignable. White resigns. Yeah, interesting game. I think one of the more important takeaways is maybe so you have a position where you're full of energy, like after rook a3, and it's pretty easy to play at this point. But the question is, how do you get such positions where you just have a super pleasant attack and always got like where you can play any move you want and just attack? Yeah, that's kind of hard. It's like strategy. It's well, we can see from earlier moves, Alekhine talks about the infiltration through the B file. He trusts that this position, maybe while it gives a static advantage to white, like he's got these good squares, these pawns are doubled, it looks like a strategic advantage for white. Well, black, on the other hand, has a lot of activity. He kind of created these weak squares himself. Let's use red. And he's got a bishop pair that has that contributes. And he just plays very akin to the weaknesses on the dark squares in a pretty brilliant way because it fixes his pawns and allows potential for more energy with this push. It kind of reminds me of that Fischer-Spassky game where Fischer was playing the Benoni as black, and Fischer plays knight h5, allowing bishop takes h5, doubling the pawns so that you have like two ugly pawns on h7 and h5. Apparently, Fischer calculated that he can undouble the pawns, like with bishop g4 later, and then there's a trade, and then the h pawn takes g4, and that's what this game is kind of like. It's like if we go back in the beginning here, the pawns double and has like an ugly structure, and then after just 15 moves, he fixes it with control of the dark squares and just kind of serving multiple purposes that are overwhelming. I don't know. That's what I'm trying to learn, but I think that's the uh, idea. He's got dynamic, very long-lasting dynamic play. It's kind of interesting. In chess, Dorfman, Soviet French coach, talks about the idea of static play versus dynamic play very frequently. He says that in dynamic play, you have to do something immediately, otherwise, you lose that dynamic potential or dynamic advantage. Well, in this game, Alekhine has like a very long-lasting dynamic play. It's kind of interesting because dynamic play is almost always very short-lasting. Anyway, very instructive game, and I will continue to continue the series. Thanks for watching.